I have 6 short comments on. No. My voice is sufficiently.
Apparently, there's no middle position.
Even without that, I'm a nuisance with them. So I want to share 6 observations that I have regarding the 2 really fabulous days. And these are not. This is not claiming the last word. I will claim the last word after the discussion. But we are supposed to open a discussion. So after I conclude, the floor is open, and Roy will continue to be the czar. So the first comment is, to some extent, I mentioned it briefly in my comment on Roy's paper, is that I think that we really had throughout those 2 days discussions regarding the dialectics of concepts and contexts. This is one dialectic, and the other is between friends and foes of the market. And to some extent, in this respect, Roy's paper kind of set up the agenda, which is similar to the agenda that we put regarding methodological tension, but not exactly the same. I like it as well, and I think that it fits nicely to the issue. But I want to kind of just note that we have those 2 different agendas. Regarding that, I think that it is interesting for each of us, I think, to think about their own position in this context. I think I share Ralph's impression that regarding the context versus concept, that most people ended up at least saying that the middle ground is the right place to be, and then there are the friends and the foes and all that, which brought me to the second point that I didn't plan on making, but Ralph's observations made me make. And Ralph sort of said something, and you correct me if I'm wrong, something to the, well, I see that we ended up talking about markets in some sense, even both of us that don't like markets, talked about it in the economic sense, and and you said something like, I don't see I'm not making it as a critique, Ralph said, but because maybe there is no alternative. So I want to share something that I talked with Lisa after her talk, which is, I don't know if you've all read, and you should, a wonderful and horrible book by Eric Posner. It is both wonderful and really horrible, by Eric Posner and Glenn Weil, called Radical Market, in which they imagine something that probably is not far away from where we are, namely a world in which all the epistemological benefits of the market, more precisely, of the way economics perceive property and contract, are eliminated and are actually trumped by big data and AI. And the obvious conclusion, if we think that markets are for epistemological purposes, and that is necessarily the logic of the market, is that subject to problems of privacy, and there are lots of issues out there, but from an internal perspective, kind of the thinking about the market is that we should dump the market, and we should use either the state, kind of a planned economy by the state, or a planned something by big corporations. And if you think like me that this is dystopia, then we should strive to develop a way to think about the concept of the market in a way that is different. That does not mean that we shouldn't use economic tools, but that the ideal that the market is supposed to serve as market is different. And here I want to kind of make reference to a very, I think, very famous, and I kind of go back to the way I teased David, a very...
Which time?
a very famous definition of the logic of the market, that's the term that you used that I did, by Liz Anderson in a book that is very, very critical of market. And Liz writes that markets, the logic of the market has 5 characteristics. It's impersonal, egoistic, exclusive, want-regarding, and oriented to exit. And that's exactly the way markets, if they are driven by a very specific my first point regarding the friends and foes of the market, is what happens when the foes of the market, of the current market, use that definition as if that this define not a conception of the market, but the concept of the market. That as if there is no other way to think about the idea of the market. And I would argue that that is a form of cooptation. It's a cooptation of people who are arguing that all the others are co-opting, but it is a cooptation of sorts. So that's my second point. So if we are thinking about markets and the kind of, in any, I hope that that's helpful. Third point is a point that kind of was raised a few times, and that's kind of and goes back to the title of the conference, methodological tensions in understanding markets, and that goes to the difficulties and the promises of real interdisciplinary work. And I thank Ralph that saved me for, I'm tired as well, so I was conceding to run too easily, and Ralph was right that this is like only half a way taking seriously the other discipline. And that, I think, brings questions about the sociology of the academy, and Carnegie, whether it is idealized or true, and two other points that I want to mention. One is about the point of self-criticism and how wonderful it is for us to tell others to be self-critical, and how much the critics, the people who are called critics, are very good at that, and oftentimes don't. So it's a process that we all need to do. Obviously, I need now to do, right? Like it's the turtles, David's turtles, all going all the way up. But there is a question of institutional design, and I go back to Carnegie. So and now I want to kind of pose a real question, and not so. So, Safra Center in the last 6 years, I'm going back to where I started, right? Safra Center in the last 6 years was organized around an idea that says that markets are sufficiently important, that postdocs and docs are sufficiently informed and yet sufficiently open to kind of become a community of scholars who can actually take seriously each other's discipline. And in preparation to the gala event that Noah is arranging for the end of those 6 years in June, you're all invited, although you guys will have to pay your way, unlike the real Safra fellows. The question is whether this is something that is a hollow hope or something that needs to be done more. Is it? I mean, Roy and I did an experiment, and with a huge amount of help from Noah. It was brilliant. You've seen them, you've heard them in the last 2 days, right? And you'll still hear them after I'll shut up eventually. But the question is whether it's too much. I don't know. It's like I'm very optimistic about that. I felt that I still feel that it is a very unique enterprise, but it requires all. And just one more teasing of Berg, because I can't resist, is that Jan, whom you've heard today and yesterday, is literally the first economist that we had. And we were eager. We got her because she's amazing. But we were eager, even if she wouldn't have been as good as you heard, we would have wanted to have. So because so something happens about that. So it's not very difficult to get historians or sociologists or lawyers. Oh, tons of those. So that's kind of the third point. The first point is about normativity, and I deliberately get to that before I get to the point about the law. And I just want to repeat the point that I've made, and Barak refused to take seriously before, is that I, as someone who is kind of can't even think without going normative, I was really holding back, and my colleagues will appreciate how difficult it is for me to hold back in general, especially on that front, on not raising the issue of how can we talk about those? How can we even understand that without putting the normativity issues on the table without any kind of evaluation? And what happens when it's not there explicitly? So with sociologists, what happened, we know, right? Or at least I know. They have adjectives. The adjective do all the normative work, right? In a juicy way. But then it's not on the table. And then if there are kind of sufficiently critical readers, they kind of push back. But the serious question that I have is whether we can really do the kind of understanding markets without trying to kind of envision normative goals, or when we do that, we do it on a defensive. We call it, I also have a normative agenda. There is also a normative lesson that needs to be made. But I'm talking about something different, about the requirement. I didn't want to point fingers, but the fact that in order to understand, we need also, it's like H.L.A. Hart talking about law, right? So he says, in order to understand what law is, you need to know what can be the normative underpinnings of that. And then you can be, and he is very critical of the cynicism, blah, 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 but there needs to be some kind of story that is normative. And again, it's a real question for me as someone who, how can you? Okay, so that's the fourth point. The sixth will be very short. The fifth point is about the law, and here again I was holding back, but I'm totally with Katerina. For me it's very frustrating the idea that people from so many disciplines can say so many smart things, but not always smart, about markets. Without kind of understanding the legal infrastructure. I think that Chris Spencer was the one that put it most kind of forcefully on the table, but quite a few others have done that as well. And so there is. So I'm trying not to say that the law is at the center of that, but it's hard for me to understand. If we talk about methodological tensions, isn't it kind of necessary to take law seriously in ways that I think are not being done by, and Ron asked me about philosophers. I think philosophers are just as guilty as maybe even more than economists in underlining the significance of of law and structuring the frameworks within which we evaluate behavior, make determinations regarding morality, or for that matter, engaging in kind of efficiency or understanding incentives or thinking about what would happen if and so on. So I think that there is a core of the law that is not the data of the law. It's not what is the definition of contract. It's what is the, and that was my point about concepts yesterday as well. It's like, what is the meaning of the building blocks of the market, I must say first, property and contract and money, and then operations and trust and others. What are the meanings and what are the possible other meanings that Ron and others and Christina's and Roy's work on money can show us that these contingent meanings that we now treat as necessary when we do the history of that or economics of that or evaluating the morality of that are legal structure, and what are the, so I think that's kind of crucial. And in this sense, as I mentioned to Ron in the break, I think that the focus is mostly on legal academics that are on the one hand very self-confident, especially in North America regarding the salaries that are being paid. But on the other, whatever, so at one point I was very obsessed in asking people all over North America, what is your definition of legal theory? And they all gave me a definition that was structurally identical to the definition of Dick Posner. Namely, legal theory is a good application of a serious methodology of theory, namely something outside of law to the data of law. And that strikes me as wrong as it can get. And the fact that lawyers think that academic lawyers think that this shows, So that's the fifth point. The last point that I want to make is just to return to the idea that this was like an amazing conference just by kind of uttering the big questions that that are beyond our subject matter that we sort of understood, I understood, that we can't avoid addressing. So, and I'll just mention two of them. One is the question about science and criticism on the one hand, and ideology that Lisa put on the table, and again on the other. So there's like the critical in us all wants to say ideology, the careful citizen at an era of populism, and we're sitting now in Tel Aviv, and what's happening in Jerusalem, right? So understands that trashing science and trashing knowledge and trashing truth and trashing liberalism, we know exactly where all this leads. So that how do we manage that? And it seems that that's all over the place, at least for me, and I think it was here. So we can't be complicit by defending, but then there's this. Okay, so this is one thing, and the other is that, and for me it came out most explicitly with Rachel, is that how much, there's something very so important and so intractable. In order to understand markets, and definitely to evaluate markets, we need a theory of value. Now, sure. And so no, labor theory, Locke and Marx, is obviously wrong. It is obviously wrong. Marginalism, subjective theory is, just as wrong, and given that it's so dominant now, we tend to attack it even more. But, it's certainly wrong. And then the kind of conventionalism that we, I think, or at least I understand. The alternative to the fallback on conventionalism or essentialism, I'm with Barak. It ends up very reactionary, let's put it this way. And then there is also a question about context. So the question about concept, how can we even think about those issues without a thick understanding of value? But then there is also a question about context. How come that so many smart people, ourselves included, but it starts with Aristotle, right? Thought about it, and we still don't have an answer.